Divorce happens. In fact, it happens to nearly half of first marriages. So how do you announce your divorce? And why are divorce announcements essential to the divorce process? Welcome to a special season of a Fresh Story podcast. Let's talk about divorce announcements.
You get divorced. You get divorced.
Getting divorced?
I'm getting a divorce.
You're getting a divorce. Because she's getting a divorce.
So what if I get divorced?
Hello, hello, hello. We're here with Jolie. Jolie, if you could take a second and give us a little bit of info about who you are, what you do, where you're from.
Sure. My name is Jolie. I am from Columbus, Ohio. And what I do, I'm like a two-time business owner, and I'm actually just about to launch a new coaching business to be an empowerment coach for women. So that's really exciting.
Well, Jolie, I've been following you for a while. We have a lot of mutual friends, and I have been so just overjoyed to see your journey through divorce into this really like the definition of a fresh start. One of the big topics, obviously, we're going to talk about today is the divorce announcement. And so as somebody that has been on social media for a long time, I'm very curious. So when you got divorced or when you decided to get divorced, what was that like in terms of the announcement, both on social, but also with your family and friends?
Yeah. So at the time that I got a divorce, my presence online was a little bit different than it is now. I've had a few stints in my life where I had a really large public audience. When I got a divorce, I really didn't have that at that moment in time. I had scaled back to only having a private account, which still had like several hundred followers. So it wasn't like it was all like my besties, but it was all people who mostly knew me in real life. So I will say that. But I did still do a public announcement when I got a divorce. And that was mostly just to proactively kind of try to protect my energy. Yeah. So I had a small following. I didn't really have a public audience to deal with at that moment in time, but I did have, I had a Facebook account with a bunch of people that knew me and my ex-husband. And so it became clear quickly that to protect my own capacity and energy, I wanted to figure out a way to put this information out into the world so I wasn't having 900 individual conversations about my divorce. And as I'm sure happens to most people, it's like I didn't have necessarily the messiest of divorces, but there were certainly like different angles and sides and perspectives of what went down and how. And so I made an attempt because, and this kind of lends to, or my experience with writing lent this to be easy for me. I made an attempt to just kind of write up something that could be kind of, for lack of a better word, a newsletter to our entire social network of like, hey fam, we just wanted to let you know, like this is what's going on. And I ran it by my ex-husband at the time because obviously it involved him as well. So I wanted it to be something that was authentic to me, but also like neutral enough that he was okay with me putting it out there in the world. So that's what I did. I put out a really heartfelt, probably several paragraphs worth of writing that I put on my Facebook as well as my Instagram. And I just tried to keep it as neutral as possible because it just, I'm sure most people understand in the midst of going through a divorce, it's like you get so burnt out emotionally from trying to explain the details of what happened and how you got here. And so I just tried to keep it as neutral as possible and as positive as possible so that no matter who read it and, internalized it, if they were to approach my ex-husband about it, they would approach him with complete neutrality of like, oh, I saw Jolie posted, I'm so sorry to hear that. But I kept most of my own experience out of it and just kind of tried to think like a PR agent.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So that's what I did on the social media front. And then with friends and family, I think with my immediate family, I made phone calls. So making individual phone calls to my mother and my siblings. I'm really close with my dad. So he was aware kind of throughout the process what was going on. But aside from my own family of origin, those were about the only phone calls I made because, you're in just such a tender, completely spent spot emotionally.
Yep.
So, and I kind of included that, I think, in my wider announcement of like, I know this probably is really blindsiding a lot of you, and maybe you're feeling upset that you're hearing about it in this way. But because this has been such a heavy piece of landscape for us to go through, like, this was the best way for us to kind of notify our network.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I was talking to another woman yesterday about this, and she said one of the hardest parts was that people would get emotional for you about themselves, and then you'd have to like hold their emotional labor. Did you find that?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think what's tricky about announcing things like this is that when you're at the point where you're ready to put this information out into the world and you're announcing it, you are like, you're done. Like,
Yeah.
you've made this decision. You're already probably at least partway through the actual, whichever route of dissolution or divorce you're going through. You're not putting this out there to get a litmus test of like how your social community feels about it. But I think a lot of people accidentally perceive it as like, oh my God, I had no idea that you guys were struggling. And like, are you sure? And yeah, I definitely, had to, shut down a couple of conversations where I had to lay the boundary of like, listen, I know that you love me. I know that you love my kids. I know that you're really feeling a lot of emotions, but like, I'm actually not, this is not a conversation where I'm asking for your feedback or your counseling. This is just me letting you know where we're at in our lives. So yeah, that was definitely a huge part of that process, was realizing like, oh my gosh, I'm over here getting stressed out about how I'm going to communicate it, and not even realizing that I'm going to have to like walk other people through their experience of my life.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Especially now from like a coaching perspective, you're like, they were really asking me to coach them through my own divorce. Were there any responses that surprised you or anything that you remember?
Yeah, I mean, I think there were a couple of people close to me where, I think divorce really triggers people a lot. It really scares people. And even people who really love you and care about you and all of those things, right? It's still just a very triggering thing where, you notice like which people pull back and which people get closer. And so, yeah, I had a couple of experiences with family members where it was like, it became this big tug of war where like, they just really wanted to talk to me as if I was like still 2 years prior in marriage counseling and like looking for solutions.
Right.
And that was tough because, it makes you feel like they don't trust your autonomy and your ability to navigate your own life experience. Right. And then you're in the position of kind of defending your life choices when all you were really doing was wanting to let people know.
Right. Informing. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I also definitely felt like there were certain people that, again, it's just like this fear of like, I don't even think it's conscious for a lot of people, but a lot of people who, maybe we had conversations in the past where we were talking about the difficulties inside of our marriage and talking about, just our struggles. Once I crossed that threshold into a different realm, which I'm not even qualifying as like better necessarily.
Right. Just a different decision
that took me into a different realm. It really isolated me from a few relationships where it felt like other people kind of perceived this as like, okay, well, you crossed the fence over there and like that terrifies me. And I don't know how to like, I don't know how to calibrate that into my life without feeling like my life feels threatened. So yeah, it was a lot. I think when I was in that point, my headspace was so overcome with just surviving the immediate difficulties of being somebody who's going through a divorce with small children. That I definitely didn't take into account, what kind of interactions I was going to be having once I was announcing this to everybody else, because my ex-husband and I knew for almost a year prior to telling people. So we had all this time to process it. And I think looking back, I didn't realize that I needed to take into account that like I had all this time to process and these other people certainly did not.
So that being said, why do you think a divorce announcement is so important when you're going through the process?
I think it's a really great way to set the tone and the kind of framework that you're operating out of. So one thing that was really important for me that I felt was a big part of my compulsion to put a statement out there was my children, right? Because everybody treats divorce as if it's like just this complete atomic bomb on your children's lives. And you're just, you're irreparably harming their psyches and all this stuff, right? And what was really important to me was that I had worked really hard to frame the divorce to my children as something that may not be pleasant and may be actually quite difficult, but was just kind of an unavoidable part of life, right? Like gears shift, things die, things regrow, things take different form, things evolve. And we don't have to be completely blown over and demolished by things when that happens. We can take this stance of like, we understand that this is a part of life and we can kind of recalibrate as needed without letting this be a completely destructive force. So I had worked really hard with my kids to try to make that their framework. And I was really nervous that when it started to become more public, that people would start showing a bunch of pity to my kids or shame. And so a huge part of my motivation was to frame it to our public network as, listen, we want you to know that we've given this so much thought. We want you to know that we don't hate each other. And we want you to know that like we have not taught our children or primed our children that this is something to be ashamed of or something to be afraid of. And so please keep in mind when you speak to our children that they are not seeing this as something to be ashamed of. They are not seeing this as something to be afraid of. And it would really help us as a family if you could kind of hold on to your own kind of emotional experience of this and let my kids be kids and let my kids, let this be to them what it is to them.
I love that. I think that's so important. Whatever the situation is, it's a great kind of baseline to have, right, for your family, because it could be a big move. It could be somebody's sick. And it's just really important to like lay that ground level. I love that. So if somebody's listening to this and they are going through a divorce and they haven't done the divorce announcement yet, what would be some tips that you could offer them before they kind of put that out into the public?
I think setting aside your emotional experience of the entire thing and trying to put on the hat of just kind of, like I said, like a neutral PR agent. You are going to have your own emotional experience of your ex and your whole experience. And it's probably not going to be great. But if you can take that hat off and put on a PR hat and just think about what is going to position me to have the most positive experience in my social network, not what is going to let me have the last word, what is going to make me look the best, but what is going to position me for success socially. And if you have children, what is going to position my children for success socially? And then I think secondly, just kind of preemptively prepping yourself that you are not responsible for other people's emotional experience of your life, and that you're inevitably going to be faced with people's opinions and troubleshooting and shaming or whatever. And most of the time people don't mean to give you that. They just don't have another way to process it. And so just trying to remain detached of like, people are going to express a lot to me. I don't have to let it land and internalize on me. I can just kind of let their reactions be whatever they are and then move on.
I love that. And I want to add too, you have done a divorce registry, which is one of the reasons that we connected. So we love that about you also, because you're like a divorce registry fan, I will say. Because there's some people that don't believe in it.
So many friends asked me like how they could help. And so eventually I was like, man, I just need to make like an Amazon wish list because this is actually so nice that my friends are trying to support me. And I love what you guys are doing. I love that you're changing the mentality around it, because I think there is so much stigma and shame around divorce and around asking for the support that you need. So what you're doing is awesome.
Thank you. Well, how can people find you and give you a follow?
They can find me on Instagram. My account is Your Knowing, which is YOURKNOWING. That's my main source. So most of my links are there and you can find me on Instagram.
And Jolie is a beautiful writer, so I highly recommend going and giving her a follow. And we're so excited to continue cheering you on. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to today's episode. A Fresh Story podcast is produced by Fresh Starts Registry, the first and only platform for everything you need to begin again, from home items to Hype Team and everything in between. You can learn more and read today's show notes at afreshstory.com.